Omicron, boosters, Fauci, what a week it's been, and it's only Tuesday. Lot to talk about. Let's talk about the new variant. I think it's fair to say that nobody knows much about the new variant. They don't know if it spreads more, and they don't know if it's more or less deadly. And as long as they don't know those things, it's probably best to see what happens, but they like to talk about it anyway. And the media's abuzz with it. The stock market has collapsed and rebounded a little bit, all based on the coverage, all based on fear. Well, what can I say? I can say one thing. I think border closure is quite silly. Why is it silly? By the time you do it, you've already had the cases spread into all these nations. So what you're really doing is you're having a big intervention that changes the lives of many people, interrupts their travel plans, only for that marginal delta of potentially lowering the seed load by maybe having fewer people travel to that area. I say potentially because it might not even do that. And the reason it might not do that is many of these travel bans, they don't start right at the moment of the ban. They start 2 days or 3 days from now. And so if you announce a travel ban in 3 days, what you're really doing is say, let's all crowd into the airports right now and come on over. And that is what you see when these flights get booked up solid immediately after the announcement of a travel ban. It's really a silly policy. And so I'm critical of the people who have implemented it. Meanwhile, the South African scientists who did a good job, look what the thanks they get. They did a good job. They sequenced the new variant. They put out that information. And as a result, they were ostracized from the global community. I think the lesson is clear. Many nations who find new variants, they might keep quiet about it in the future. We've incentivized them to keep quiet. And I think that's going to be problematic. So I do think that travel bans, probably not a good idea, certainly not necessary at this moment in the pandemic. We will learn a lot more about the variant, and we will learn about whether or not the vaccine covers it, I think, quite soon. The next point, boosters. The CDC and the president, they had a nice statement. They said, we don't know a lot about this new variant. And as long as we don't know, we're going to change the rule around boosters from if you're over 18, you can get a booster, to if you're over 18, you should get a booster. But that's a bizarre claim because you've conceded you know nothing about the new variant. So if that claim was to be made without knowing new information, you could have made it a few days ago. You don't need to make it right at this moment. It's really kind of fueling a panic. What do I think about that claim? I think they really are, they're on a far ledge there. They're on a limb of a tree and they have little to stand on. What do I mean? There's some 18, 19, 20-year-old boy who's already gotten 2 doses of Moderna. This is a healthy person. This person doesn't work in healthcare. This person has no high-risk features. And this person is now being advised by the CDC that they should get a booster. But that means, to me, the CDC has some idea that the benefits of this person getting the booster, this 20-year-old boy, is greater than the harms of this 20-year-old man getting the booster. That's what it means to me. But they don't know that to be true because the benefits is a theoretical reduction in the risk of severe SARS-CoV-2 outcomes that nobody really knows for sure because not many people of that age were included in any study. And certainly nobody with the 2 doses of Moderna, there's no published study that shows what happens to a 20-year-old boy after 2 doses of Moderna being randomized to the booster, no booster. That study has not been disseminated. It's not been out there. We only have a press release from the Pfizer study. So we really don't know what the reduction in bad outcomes is. We do know that the 2 Moderna doses this 20-year-old man got are already immensely protective. So what is the value of getting the booster? What about myocarditis? We know Moderna has much more myocarditis than Pfizer, so much so that many European nations have halted its use altogether in anyone under the age of 30. We know that in the Pfizer data from Israel, that the 3rd dose, appears to have a lower risk of myocarditis than dose 2, partly perhaps because it's being given so much later. But it's not 0. And so every excess myocarditis you get after a dose 3 Moderna, you really have to ask yourself, is that risk worth it? What is the benefit you're getting from this? And so I do think that the CDC's unilateral changing of policy without having an advisory committee, without seeking the input of external advisors is quite reckless. It doesn't represent good policymaking in my mind. And it makes me concerned when the head of the CDC is saying that masks have 80% benefit, not true, as well as making this decision, which is really a gamble. And it's not just a gamble for this vaccine and this group of people. I mean, they are gambling, sure, but it's really a gamble with public confidence in vaccines more broadly. And that's why I get really kind of concerned about it. Because if the gamble is right, I think we'll have a problem, actually. People will be more likely to gamble with vaccine policy in the future. But if the gamble is wrong, we will have a calamity. We'd have a nuclear bomb explode in the setting of vaccine confidence, and you'll have shattered vaccine confidence for ages to come. It will be quite terrible. So I really, really think that they need some new guidance at the CDC. I don't know who's running this policy, but you've had the top two officials in FDA FDA vaccine products resign. You've had a number of external commenters suggest that you're playing fast and loose. You've had Paul Offit, who's on the Vaccine Advisory Committee, writing with the two resigned scientists an op-ed saying that they disagree with universal boosters. You have Marian Gruber, Phil Krause, and Paul Offit writing that op-ed. This is a problem. I mean, you need some temperance within the administration to govern boosters. Yes, vaccination is a good, but that doesn't mean everyone has to get unlimited vaccines all the time without any data. You want randomized control trials to show you the benefit of each incremental vaccine. So that, to me, I think is a big problem. And so we shall see what happens there. The last thing, Anthony Fauci is doing the Sunday morning talk show circuit. He says, and this is a quote, I really couldn't believe it. They're really criticizing science because I represent science, says Fauci. He basically says that anyone who criticizes his policy positions that he's taken throughout this pandemic is directly criticizing the institution of science itself. Is that true? I hesitate to say that it is not true at all. No one person speaks for all of science. Science is a process. It's not any individual. Anthony Fauci doesn't speak for all of science. Moreover, Anthony Fauci, in his role as pandemic advisor, is not even acting principally as a scientist. He's acting principally as a policy expert. And policy is science plus values. So he's constantly inserting his own values into this. And anyone who works with broad, sweeping policy should be judged for it, at times celebrated for the good calls, and at times criticized for the bad calls. So I just want to highlight 10 things, and I'm going to put this out on my Substack, 10 things that Fauci did as part of his policy repertoire that I think we can consider. In the future, historians will consider this. Number one, it was Fauci who in mid-March of 2020 advocated for 15 days of hunkering down or sheltering in place. That was a decision that deviated from some prior pandemic guidance. Many will feel like it was a reasonable decision. I actually didn't have any qualms about it at the time because it was a reasonable precaution in the setting of uncertainty. But others will see it precipitated a series of unanticipated events where global governments will forever think lockdown is an acceptable policy solution. And it will be sanctioned and reintroduced. And that may have serious downsides. Number two, Fauci argued strongly against school reopening in April 2020. Take a look at my Substack. I give many quotes where he was critical of Governor DeSantis reopening schools in the spring or critical of school opening more broadly. Those criticisms did a lot to suppress schools, and thus I think that was a bad policy call, and he will ultimately pay the price in the history books for having made that call. He was 100% wrong and has done tremendous damage there. I think number three, Fauci famously flip-flopped on masks, I talk about. Of course, we all know in early March, he said that they don't work. He doesn't advise them. And by end of April, he was saying that you ought to do it. And that was a flip-flop. So he lied one way or the other. Either he lied the first time, he wanted to protect the supply, as he says, and so that's why he downplayed it. Or the other option is he lied the second time and he actually didn't think they worked that well and didn't have new information that they worked well, but still told you to use it at the end of April. One way or the other, he's telling you a lie. And I think that is a problem because that sowed the seed of doubt for that issue. And that really did make that issue a live issue throughout the entire pandemic. Fauci opposed a one-dose strategy in the USA. Go read my Substack below. I'll put a link to it. But he did oppose a one initial dose vaccination strategy and thought we should stick with the 2 doses 21 or 28 days apart. Of course, the UK did the opposite. And of course, now multiple models show that one-dose strategy, that was the better strategy. So that was a mistake. Number 5. Fauci admitted to then New York Times reporter Don McNeil that the herd immunity threshold he offered was in part fabricated to try to push up vaccination rates. He kept changing the number to get more people vaccinated, so that was a noble lie. But now the CDC is saying that they have given up on the goal of herd immunity entirely. They accept it's an endemic virus. So that to me is a problematic position that he's going to have to reconcile with in the history books. Number 6. Fauci was part of the pressure. He repeatedly said that the FDA must authorize boosters for all, which did lead to Gruber and Krause resigning from the FDA, who now have written the op-ed with Paul Offit. Number 7, Fauci supported vaccine mandates, which I believe have increased vaccination rates by some percentage points, but have negative consequences that are outside that domain that may take the place of political consequences and consequences on people who've been pushed out of society to some degree, who have lost their employment. Those consequences will be dire, and I think that that's an open question. History books will decide if that was the right call. Number 8, Fauci actually pushed for travel bans for the new variant, Omicron, a decision that many other experts actually said was unhelpful, and I think there he was clearly wrong. Number 9, Fauci, I write in the Substack, he might have funded laboratory research in Wuhan that resulted in genetic manipulation of a coronavirus that then leaked and triggered a global pandemic. I don't know the answer to that question, but he might have done that, and I think somebody needs to look into that. Number 10, Fauci says that before we can return to total normalcy, we need less than 10,000 cases a day. That's a number that he appears to have invented entirely. He has no firm basis for that number. And so I mentioned these 10 points, not because I really want to pick on him too much. I just want to say that if you're going to go out there and egotistically say that you speak for science, you have to acknowledge that these 10 specific things that you have advocated for are not scientific positions, they're policy positions. And somebody might feel differently than you. And I think on several of the points, he was demonstrably wrong at the time. And I think some points are open questions, and some points, I think maybe it was reasonable what he did, actually. I actually don't disagree with him. These are just 10 things I thought of, but there are many, many more. And I think someday somebody will comb through all the news stories and find them all. And he will be judged for that. And that's not bad. Actually, that's necessary. That's good. And other people may say, well, who are these senators to criticize him? Whether or not you like the senators or not, you have to acknowledge that that is the role of the Senate. Their job is to question these people. Sometimes they're on your side, sometimes they're on the different side, but their job is to hold these unelected experts accountable for their policy recommendations. And I do think that they need to do that in this case, and they do need to ask these tough questions. So my overall thoughts on this situation, I think social media shows you where people are. People are panicked. They have been deprived of social contact for so long. They hear about a new variant and their heads explode on Twitter. It's really quite painful to see. I think social media is done a great disservice throughout this pandemic. It has led the New York Times coverage. When it comes to boosters for all, I think that they have a difficult situation, that they are making a gamble. They don't know that for sure, that is a sound strategy. That's why Paul Offit, Marian Gruber, and Phil Krause has written their op-ed. And I think they're gambling with much more than this one vaccine. They're gambling with the nature of vaccination. And as for Fauci saying, I am science, that's not true. You can be an important scientist. He is an important scientist. He's written many important books in science, and he's published many important articles. But you don't speak for science. No man ever speaks for science. Science is an entity that is beyond any one person. And it is a mistake to believe that you cannot be questioned and your policy cannot be questioned when you have driven significant policy that has affected the lives of hundreds of millions of people. And I suspect when history is written, it will be written more apolitically. And so he will lose, I think, the support of the left, who he has, I think, moved closer to over time. And when he loses, I think, the political support, which is blind and not based on evidence, and one actually looks at his policy positions and judges the evidence, I think many will be great errors. I think the school closure was a calamitous error. And it didn't have to be that way. Of course, Switzerland reopened within 6 weeks. Other nations did reopen. And Florida did against his wishes, which will ultimately be seen as the right call. So we have to own our policy decisions if you're running federal policy. That's all I have to say about that. So these are some thoughts on the week to date. You know what to do if you like this video. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below, follow the channel, hit that little bell, whatever they call it on this website. Until next time.